Dr. Fuhrman is a board-certified family physician, 7-time New York Times bestselling author, and internationally recognized expert on nutrition. Today, Dr. Fuhrman is going to talk about the nutritarian way of eating and his wonderful book, Eat for Life. It's really great to have you back, Dr. Fuhrman, and we extend a warm virtual welcome to you from Michigan.
Thank you. Wish you guys could be here in San Diego, where it's warm. We've had a great, a lot of moisture this year, which is probably good for the farmers and everybody. All right, so this is what I'm going to talk about over the next 35 minutes, and I'll get to some of the chat, and towards the end, I'll try to cover the questions you add in the chat. And I'm describing this unique opportunity we have in human history today with these advancements in nutritional science to radically extend human lifespan and slow the aging process. So I'm saying that the normal lifespan for humans should be between 97 and 107 years old. So we can live past 100 years in good health using these modern advances in nutritional science, which we're going to go over today in this discussion. So we can slow the aging process and prevent people from dying from the common causes of premature death. And the number one cause of death for people who are adults in America is heart attacks, and then followed by strokes and cancers. So if we removed heart attacks and strokes and the common cancers, particularly prostate, breast, and colon cancer, and we wouldn't see, that's one of the aspects of living longer. You can't increase slow aging and increase human longevity and expect that to happen unless we prevent people from having heart attacks, prevent them from having strokes, and prevent them from having cancer. And I'm saying cancer is largely preventable, and it's not an inevitable consequence of aging, and cancer is a relatively new phenomenon in human history. It didn't exist eons ago. It just exists in the modern world. For example, the medical literature and the scientific literature didn't even mention cancer as existing before the 17th century. It was in the 17th century when the first cancers that started to expose themselves and make people aware, make physicians and health people aware of them, were scrotal cancers and testicular cancers in men who worked as chimney sweeps and were exposed to smoke. In those days, there were not so much access to processed foods and animal products that combined lead for a very cancer-promoting environment. But before we get into that, all these things that promote cancer, we're going to say that the same dietary portfolio that slows aging also prevents heart disease, prevents strokes, and prevents cancer. It's not one program for dementia and another program for heart disease, another program for cancer. You can just the same foods that do all these do the best protection. And to start right now, we're going to divide foods into 3 different categories: unrefined plant food or produce, animal products, which is 1/3 of the American diet, and processed foods, which are about 60% of what Americans eat. The processed foods are things that are, pasta, bread, salad oil, mayonnaise, donuts, cookies, crackers, rice cakes, breakfast bars, chips, soft drinks, oils, things like that. They're things that that are processed and made by humans. And those designer foods, those processed foods made by humans, are made by food companies that are designed to hook people and make them into food addicts. And they're designed to have a high bliss point and to be very calorically concentrated and to be highly flavored and full of chemical additives and things that promote overeating and promote shortening of human lifespan. So I want you to memorize these 5 words, because these 5 words are the most proven methodology to slow aging and extend human lifespan. The most proven methodology, you could write this down, are, here's 3 of the words: moderate caloric restriction, and the other 2 words are moderate caloric restriction with micronutrient excellence. So those are the 5 words: moderate caloric restriction in the context of micronutrient excellence. So we're trying to have a dietary portfolio rich in the amount of micronutrients and the diversity of micronutrients, the wide spread of micronutrients. And the more variety of micronutrients and different types of fibers we get, the longer we live, as long as we don't take in excessive calories. I always make the joke, and I say, and it's not even a joke, it's really serious. I say we live on half of what we consume, and the other half meets the needs of our doctors. In other words, most Americans are consuming twice the calories humans need. That's the extra calories they consume that accelerates aging. And we can start off the bat and say there's no such thing as a healthy overweight person. That extra fat on the body is pathologic tissue that spews out pro-inflammatory substances that age us and build up insulin resistance, which also ages us and leads to premature death. So we have to maintain we have to be slim, and the human species isn't designed to be overweight. And right now we have 89% of Americans have a BMI above 23. People tell you that 77% of Americans are overweight, but that's not true, because they can classify 77% as being overweight because they use a BMI of 25 as the demarcation line between normal weight and overweight. And we know that there's no centenarian, no long-lived populations or peoples who average or who have BMIs that run above 23 even. The optimal BMI for a woman is below 21 and for a male below 22. So 23, if we use 23 as the demarcation line, which is permissive enough, then we get 89% of Americans that are overweight, and the other 11% are mostly cigarette smokers and people who have chronic illnesses, occult cancers, other autoimmune conditions and depression and other alcoholics, other things that keep them thin. It's only 2.4% of the total amount of people that have a normal weight, a BMI below 23, that who are doing it because they eat relatively healthfully and exercise regularly. That's only 2.4%. The rest are either sickly or they're overweight. And I'm saying, if you eat American food, if you're in good health, you should become overweight, because the American diet is a disease-causing diet. And if I give a lecture to large audiences, especially to physician audiences, and the first thing I say to them when I start out, I say, raise your hand if you've been shot by a bullet, maybe stabbed by a knife in the torso, or you or your family, or your close relatives have been stabbed or shot. And like one person raises their hand out of 500 people in the room. And I say, well, how about anybody who's had a cancer diagnosis or a heart attack? Raise your hand. And like the whole room raises their hand. And I say, of course, that's the neighborhood you want to stay living in? You expect that it's not going to happen to you, that you're not going to meet a tragic end, and you're not going to cut short your life dramatically and not suffer like other Americans do? You're not going to have some different outcome? This terrorism that's raiding our neighborhoods because of the nutritional stupidity that's killing everybody, and you want to do what other Americans do, or you want to protect yourself now and realize that we're faced with a crisis, a healthcare crisis, because we're trying to use drugs which we learn are poisonous. In medical school, we learn drugs are poisonous. They increase the risk of cancer, and they work by blocking or interfere with natural body processes. But we think that feeling good is getting good. And we think that suppressing inflammation with a drug makes you better, and it just pushes the poisons back in. Actually, the inflammatory response is intertwined with the process of repair. That's the first thing we learn in pathology, in the pathology textbooks that most medical students read, called Robbins and Cochrane. In that book, there's a paragraph in the first chapter that says the inflammatory response is closely intertwined with the process of repair and serves to wall off, remove the injurious agent, and sets into motion a series of events that, as much as it can, tries to heal and reconstitute any damaged tissue. The body is a self-healing machine. And so I'm saying, when you have a headache, the headache isn't the problem. The cause of the headache is the problem, and taking a drug just pushes the poisons back in. The headache is trying to fix the problem. It's trying to remove the toxins out. When you have an asthmatic whose lungs are inflamed, the inflammation is the effort of the lung tissue to utilize the lung as an organ of elimination, but it tightens the breathing passageways and could even kill a person. But the lung tissue, the cells don't know that. We can take steroids to push the poisons back in so we don't react to these irritants, but nevertheless, it's the irritants trying to come out. So we can get well from asthma and get people not needing medication, like we can get well from psoriasis and mixed connective tissue disease and Sjogren's syndrome. We can get well from autoimmune diseases, because nutritional excellence is not only prevents these chronic illnesses, but it can be therapeutically effective to reverse disease. So this degree of nutritional excellence I'm talking about utilizes the portfolio of foods that have the most proven anti-cancer benefits. And I use this acronym GBOMBS, which obviously is GBOMBS, which stands for greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds like flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, sesame seeds, because those foods are not the only foods we eat, but they're foods that with a tremendous amount of scientific evidence to have anti-cancer effects. For example, the lignans in seeds have been shown to reduce cancer deaths dramatically. There was a study on women who had breast cancer. They already had breast cancer. So they tracked their lifespan with cancer. They followed them for 10 years. And they found that those who had a third of a milligram of seeds in their diet, a third of a milligram of lignans from seeds in their diet, had a 71% decreased risk chance of dying over that 10-year period compared to people not having those lignans. And a third of a milligram is nothing. Like a teaspoon of ground flax seeds has 7 milligrams in it. And that way they didn't change their diet. They didn't eat healthy. They just had some lignans in their diet. I'm saying if we could throw a dart at any of these foods and I could show you dramatic amount of evidence to show how incredibly protective each of these substances alone is. But when we put together a dietary portfolio that uses all these types of foods synergistically, then we see the magic happens. And people can't lose weight, and they can't comfortably eat less. Diets don't work because people don't focus on nutritional quality of what they're eating, and they're ubiquitously nutritionally deficient, which leads to a buildup of toxic waste products in their body, which gives them an unrelenting feeling of discomfort and fatigue if they don't overeat calories to halt the detox process. In other words, I'm saying that overeating is like smoking. The smoker has to smoke because if he stops smoking, he feels too uncomfortable. The eater has to keep eating. If they don't keep overeating, they'll feel too uncomfortable because detox, withdrawal from poisonous habits and poisonous foods, is too uncomfortable. So you have to keep eating to prevent the detox or healing. The only way you can be comfortable eating less calories and feel desirous of the right amount of calories if you start to improve the nutritional quality of what you eat and you start to flood the body with nutrients and lower the levels of retained metabolic waste products. And I'm also saying here that white flour, bread, bagels, croissants is the same as sugar. They're sugar equivalents. It enters the bloodstream just as if you ate a sugar cube. And these sugar equivalents, this bread or this white flour products, this cake diet Americans eat, is not food. It's a drug. It works on the brain like a drug because it strips the body of nutrients because to metabolize empty calories into energy, you have to use cofactors, vitamins and minerals, and you produce reactive oxygen species, and you need antioxidants to diffuse the inflammation produced by converting calories into energy. And when you eat an apple or a berry or a piece of sweet potato, it contains vitamins and minerals and cofactors, so it can turn it into energy without creating toxins in the process. When you eat white bread with none of the cofactors involved, then you, of course, you're going to have trouble converting into energy, so it's more readily stored as fat. And the energy production that does ensue then results in nutritional deficiencies and more toxic waste products. And because we have a high degree of caloric concentration, because these high glycemic load foods enter the bloodstream so rapidly, and there's no difference in the speed of entry into the bloodstream from sugar or white flour, bread, pasta. People eat, the cake diet. They have a burger, which is a piece of cake with a piece of meat in it, or pizza, piece of cake with a piece of cheese on it, or they have cake, or they have pancakes, or they have cold cereals which are like cake, or they have muffins which are cake, or they have bread. It's all just cake with meat and cheese and other things they eat. They're nutritionally deficient. I'm saying that a piece of chicken is like a bagel. The piece of chicken is like a bagel because neither one contains a significant micronutrient load. There's no phytochemicals or antioxidants in chicken and animal products like chicken or a bagel or bread. It's like the same nutritionally deficient food that leads to people becoming an overeater. They can't control their appetite. I'm saying the rush of calories into the bloodstream all at once, the load which comes from eating oils too, which can flood the body very rapidly, hits the dopamine receptors in the brain, which you become dopamine sensitive over time. So there's different mechanisms going on in which you become obsessed with food. And then you're become dopamine seeking, and you're not satisfied with the fewer calories. You have to take in a high caloric rush. An apple won't satisfy you. It has to be like a bunch of dates or some candy or something sweeter, because apple's not sweet enough to satisfy your appetite after a meal even. So you're hooked on to this caloric concentration. You're hooked on to all the heavy digestive state from animal protein too, and you can't tolerate eating a more plant-based, lighter diet that's going to lead to a thinner and more satisfied and give you disease protection. So I want you to remember, I want you to show you this make-believe slide. I know I'm not showing you the slides, but I'm giving you the words on the slide. And I want you to write these down and memorize these words right now. And these words are, in a review of 2006 epidemiologic studies, now here's what you have to memorize, here's the part. Raw vegetables showed the most consistent and powerful association with the reduction of cancers of all types. Let me say that one more time. The consumption of raw vegetables shows the most consistent and powerful association with the reduction of cancers of all types. So the question there to you is, do you eat a big salad every single day or not? Do you have a big salad that has like lettuce and also the cruciferous greens mixed in with a lot of leaves in there? And do you chew it exceptionally well to form all those beneficial compounds in the mouth? And don't forget, lettuce is a superfood. Lettuce is the richest source of sulfoquinavos, which fuels the good bacteria and growth in the gut, and probably the most powerful anti-cancer substance on the dietary landscape are the ITCs, or the isothiocyanates, found in green cruciferous vegetables. So putting something green cruciferous like bok choy, arugula, watercress, cabbage, kale, collard greens, some kind of cruciferous in the mixed in that salad, bok choy mixed in with that, plus the fact that then you can put raw red onion or scallion on there too, and mix that. And then you can use a dressing made from nuts and seeds, because you get a horse of a different color, because Americans get their fat intake from oils and animal fats, which rush into the bloodstream slowly and are appetite stimulants. I'm saying oils are always fattening. The person that's overweight is consuming oil, then they're not going to lose weight, because the rush of fat calories in the bloodstream gets stored as fat. It goes from the lips to the hips in 5 minutes flat. And you can't be putting fat on your body and taking fat off the body at the same time. But when you have your fat intake from nuts and seeds compared to the fat from oils that are even extracted from the same nuts and seeds, the fat calories go into the bloodstream so slowly that they're preferentially burned for energy as opposed to stored as fat, and they're more satisfying. And part of the calories that are coming to the bloodstream are biologically not accessible. They can't get into the bloodstream because the sterols and stanols, the fibers in nuts and seeds, hold on to that fat and suck it out into the toilet bowl. So you have more fat in the stool and more fat in the toilet, so less fat on you. So I'm saying that we're animals designed to eating natural foods. So maybe I'll make this radical statement. Here is the radical statement. It's hard for people to believe. Olive oil is a major factor leading to higher rates of breast cancer. And the reason I can say that with because we have scientific integrity is because we know that Americans are consuming about 500 calories from olive oil a day, and it leads to them being overweight. And being overweight is a major factor that leads to breast cancer by making people insulin resistant, raising aromatase action, which produces more estrogen stimulation, and promotes angiogenesis. So all the factors that promote cancer, that promote being overweight, promote cancer, and olive oil keeps you overweight. You can't lose weight pouring oil on your food. And because oil is an appetite stimulant, it makes people want to eat more calories of other foods that aren't even in the oil. So see, somebody just put in the chat box, what oils are good? I don't know. What kind of cigarettes are good? Is there a brand of heroin that's good? I'm saying to you that if oils are 120 calories a tablespoon, then they're fattening in proportion that you utilize them. So the more you use them, the more fattening they are. And being overweight, I mean, you could be, if you're a worker and lived in the Middle Ages and you're working behind a plow 8 hours a day and burn 3,000 calories a day in the field, or you're a physical laborer with a pick and shovel digging holes all day long, or you're a professional athlete, a little bit of oil is not going to make so much difference if your body fat is low and you're eating a lot of healthy food. But most Americans work with computers all day, do minimal exercise, and they have a lot of fat in their body. If a body, to be healthy, a male's body fat shouldn't be below 15%, and a female's shouldn't be above 25%. And ideally, the males probably should be below 13%. But 15% is good enough if you're there. But that, so we're talking about a population that's everybody's overweight and they're looking for the good oils they can pour in their food. You should be looking for things you could take out of your diet, not things you could put on. And why would you eat empty calories? Oils are empty calories, no nutrients in it, no fiber, no substance. Why take the avocado, not the avocado oil? Take the walnut, not the walnut oil. There's no nutritional scientist in the world would say that sesame oil is healthier than sesame seeds, or because all the nutrients and the fibers and the protective anti-cancer substances are bound to the fibers in the food. So you take a whole, natural, healthy food, and you process it and you remove its healing and health-giving properties. So there's no such thing as a healthy oil, because you're better off eating the whole food the oil was derived from. You could say one oil is healthier than another oil, but that still doesn't, we don't buy a car by comparing it to a junkyard wreck. We want to make, for example, the Prevamid study showed that when people were given olive oil to take home and extra virgin olive oil, they had lower rates of heart attacks by 15% because they weren't eating butter or some other sources of fat. So when they told them to take away the oil and eat more nuts and seeds, the heart attack rates went down by 60%. So we're talking here about making the best possible dietary choices. So we make salad dressings by, let's say I'm blending an orange with lightly toasted sesame seeds and some cashews, putting some blood orange vinegar and a squeeze of lemon, or taking a garlicky tomato sauce and putting in some almonds and black fig vinegar and a few roasted pieces of roasted garlic, and whipping the dressing up out of the nuts and seeds and making a million different delicious dressings out of, tofu and hemp seeds and cashews and roasted garlic and a little bit of, put a little bit of miso or nutritional yeast or kelp in there and make it like a Caesar dressing. We can make all kinds of fancy dressings. And great desserts, like great ice creams, by putting a little macadamia nut in with real vanilla bean powder and a banana and a little bit of plant milk and whipping it up in the blender, making incredible delicious desserts, sauces, main dishes, a Thai curry sauce, all these things to flavor vegetables and salads without using oil. And when you cook oil, and when you cook foods at high heat, you also cause damage and you form carcinogenic and genotoxic compounds too, which makes it much even worse. We're talking about the most favorable way to cook food is by water-based cooking, like soups and stews and crock pots and blanching vegetables, things where you're not going to bake and darken and harden and barbecue and make things crispy and dark and black and brown, because then you form these polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are not favorable for your long-term health, and more acrylamides. Okay, so I'm giving this overview that the dietary portfolio that slows aging and is most protective and most helps you obtain eating the right amount of food, losing weight, being satisfied with enough fiber and nutrients. You don't have to overeat. I call a nutritarian diet, which just means a super healthy diet. We're paying attention to the nutritional quality, the nutritional content, and the nutritional diversity of the diet. That's what we're calling it, nutritarian. We're paying attention to what we eat. We're making every mouthful count. And most people have gotten through half their lives. They're over the age of 50 and they've eaten garbage their whole life, and they've started to develop medical problems, and they really got to change. If they have an opportunity to change things around, but they can't keep going on, with halfway measures. They have to start to adopt a pretty radical change in the way they're eating if they want to not suffer the consequences and have happen to them what happens to other Americans. Now, I've given this somewhat negative viewpoint of processed foods, and we should also insert the fact that animal food, not just the fat in animal products, but the animal protein itself, raises IGF-1 and also raises pro-inflammatory substances in the body like TMAO or trimethylamine oxide, but you build more unfavorable bacteria. The animal fats do impede, saturated fats have the most powerful effect at making people insulin resistant, which makes them a higher glucose level in response to a glycemic load food, which means they're more prone to diabetes when they have more saturated fat in their tissues, besides just fat in the body in general. But one of the major detriments is the higher levels of IGF-1 and angiogenesis promoting proteins, which then excessively promote cellular replication, which allow cancers to get the fuels to grow. Animal protein stokes the fire and allow cancer cells to replicate and create the bonfire, and which eventually results in metastases and death. And if you put animal protein together with high levels of insulin, then you have this hormonally unfavorable sandwich that Americans live on, which is a high glycemic carbohydrates mixed with animal protein, which then, of course, accelerates both cancer death and heart attack and stroke death. And it makes person nutritionally deficient and overly crave calories at the same time. So a nutritarian diet, on the other hand, we use a lot of seeds and whole intact grains that are not ground into flour, which can be cooked in water like quinoa or steel-cut oats, with ground seeds and berries and plant milk for breakfast and a big salad and a bowl of vegetable bean soup and some fruit for lunch and maybe a curried vegetable dish or a wok vegetable dish or an Asian or Thai dish or some kind of delicious dinner where you're having some more raw vegetables with a dip and some more cooked vegetables and maybe a nice healthy dessert made of some kind of fruit or frozen fruit. And we can give people the opportunity, this unique opportunity in human history, to eat a delicious tasting diet that the body adapts to lose weight effortlessly, to not be on a diet, but just be eating for health, and to get rid of the fear, reverse any diseases they have, get off their blood pressure medications, their cholesterol and drugs, or diabetic medications, so they shouldn't have diabetes anymore. In other words, within a few weeks, maybe even 4 to 6 weeks, and for some people, their type 2 diabetes resolves, their high blood pressure goes back to normal, their cholesterol comes down, and they really start to feel that they're getting a degree of disease protection that gives them security, and they can live with, be joyous and be passionate about what they want to accomplish in life, to enjoy the outside world and not living in fear of dying all the time and being stuck to medications and doctors, not being stuck on the, what's the word on, like the umbilical cord between you and your doctor in the medical professions. If you can't live without a doctor, without medicines, it's ridiculous, right? I don't even go to doctors. I don't go to myself even. That was a stupid joke, but it's funny when a Zoom conference, you can't see if people are laughing at your jokes, so you don't have any idea if they even got them sometimes. But all right, let me pause here for a minute and scan the chat box to make sure I'm not confusing any of you, and you make sure you're getting all this. Okay, so I'm going to scan this now in the chat box. There's a lot of questions here, and I'll actually enlarge it first and then go through some of this. Okay. This person has osteoporosis. Food supplements could be recommended. Well, osteoporosis is mostly caused by weak muscles, which then leads to weak bones. So your muscles and bones strengthen or weaken together. So if you build strength and if you do the right exercise and you take in an adequate diet, and don't forget a nutritarian diet is a protein adequate and calcium adequate diet. We do recommend people take certain supplements conservatively to make sure their vitamin D level is above 30, right? So you want to have adequate D, but we're taking in a huge amount of green vegetables and beans and nuts and not taking in empty calories, which lowers the calcium density of your diet too. There's been an increased risk of, in some studies that show that vegans have an increased risk of osteoporosis, but those were vegans who I analyzed the diets in those studies. They were not eating a nutritarian diet, and I found they were eating half the calcium levels and half the protein levels of people following a diet that I recommend, which is so rich in these healthy foods we're talking about. So yes, I strongly recommend that you adopt this nutritional program, but you're not going to build bone from having good nutrition. Because good nutrition may prevent excessive loss of bone from bad nutrition, but it's not going to suddenly build back bone. That you have to do by getting stronger, which means you have to do exercise to build strength and to build bone mass. Okay. Next question. Just because illness with identified cancer does not mean it didn't exist. People did not die of it. That's true. There were some rectal cancers in mummified remains, but if we looked at the 160 mummified remains, there was only one case of rectal cancer, and that was found in a person who was an aristocrat or a king who had the access to meat. There was no cancers found in people in poor people graves, or other than the. So I'm saying yes, cancer was tried to be identified, and we tried to identify cancers in human remains from years ago, and we found that it did not hardly exist. So I'm not saying it did not exist at all, but it hardly existed, and it was not a common cause of death back in the in prior centuries. If we look at, for example, the lifespan of people in the 14th century, we have good records on 150 Renaissance artists who produced works of art, and they were male. They didn't die during childbirth, and we know that 1 in every 9 women died giving birth, and a lot of the high infant mortality rate. So saying the average person died at 50 or 60 is irrelevant, because they're mixing in people who died. So many people died in the first few months of life, and so many women died when they were giving birth. So we have to look at men who lived past the age of 20 or 30 to produce works of art. And those men we found lived longer than men today lived. Kind of interesting, isn't that? So it does not mean one suffered or died of B12. Probably I don't know what they're talking about, but B12 deficiency You don't get B12 is in animal products, so there was no large vegan populations until recent times. So we can't say that there wasn't a lot of B12 deficiency back then because so many people ate meat animal products. B12 is mostly important now to give us some of the benefits of that we do get from eating animal products. For those of us with a plant-based diet, might take some extra zinc, B12, DHA, and vitamin D, and even iodine to make sure we're getting an optimal level of these nutrients. And I'm not saying people of yesteryear didn't eat any animal products. They did, but much smaller amounts. They couldn't afford the animal products we eat today to have the large amounts we eat today, except for, very rich or the wealthy kings and queens that then had some more overweight in the pictures and had more likelihood of getting premature deaths and things. Okay. Can I write the 5 words in the chat? No, I'll just tell you somebody did that. Moderate caloric restriction with micronutrient excellence. Thank you. Thank you. Is it possible to reverse hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, get off armour thyroid through diet and lifestyle? No, it's not possible to completely get off it, but you don't need armour thyroid, which has T3 and it's more excitatory and can promote atrial fibrillation and more anxiety. You're better off with just regular Synthroid or thyroxine, and you can lose weight and get healthier and lose less thyroid hormone. But if you have a long term of hypothyroidism, it's not generally reversible. I had one or two young people who had, when they first got it, when they were young, reverse it, but no people who were significantly hypothyroid for years and older when they developed the problem, which is mostly due to the exposure to plastic chemicals and endocrine disruptors. And the average person in America, from eating mostly animal products and seafood, has about the credit card amount of plastic in their body, of microplastics in their body, which can damage the thyroid. The thyroid is very sensitive to these chemicals in our environment. Americans consume 2 times the calories needed, have a hard time believing this until looking up the average calorie intake of 3,600, not exactly 2 times, but not far off. Scary. That's right. The average calorie intake in people in rural China is 1,600 calories a day, and Americans are eating 3,600. Pretty hard to believe. It is double the amount of calories people need. And so anyway, let's go on. My endocrinologist just wrote me to start Synthroid for hypothyroidism. Kind of decide if your TSH is above 6 or 7, you should start it. But the optimal level of medication should be to keep your TSH between 2 and 4. So you don't need to take a lot of Synthroid and use the TSH of 2 to 4. So you don't take too much if you need that. Flaxseeds effects on male testosterone. Flax seeds the flax seeds, the mushrooms, and even soy products are magic. They're magic foods because they block estrogen where you want it to be blocked on the breast and the prostate, but they stimulate estrogen and testosterone where you want it stimulated, like on bones and muscles. So they block the E1 receptors on the breast tissue and prostate tissue, but they stimulate the E2 receptors on bones and leading to higher muscle and bone strength. So we're talking here about these foods are ideally favorable and beneficial for people to prevent prostate and breast cancer. GBOMS stands for greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and other low-sugar fruits, pomegranates, kumquats, loquats, GBOMS, berries, and seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, sesame seeds, hemp seeds. Flax seeds, chia seeds, and hemp seeds are high in omega-3 fatty acids, which are more anti-inflammatory fats. It's good to have a balance. And walnuts, of course, have a lot of omega-3 too. So it's good to have a balance of nuts and seeds in your diet. So make sure you're not eating all omega-6 nuts and seeds. You're eating about half of omega-3 nuts and seeds, which is flax and walnuts and chia and hemp. Okay, next one, fresh and raw and seasoned. That's right. We have this opportunity to have raw salads and raw foods all year round, which our ancestors didn't have access to. We could get microgreens and sprouts and lettuces all year round. I mean, this is what I'm saying. We get organic foods from all over the country, and it's just amazing. And somebody's eating those foods in the supermarkets. Some people are buying the organic stuff because they wouldn't be selling it if nobody was buying it. So some people are learning and eating better, eating healthier. Not many of us, but a lot of people are, more and more than ever. And certainly there's a huge growth in people interested in organic farming and organic eating and eating more plant-based diets, and an amazing growth in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, where when I started out, there were like 20 physicians interested in that at our initial meetings, founding meetings. And then now there's tens of thousands of doctors interested in these concepts. So yeah, we're going on here, more chat box here. Please discuss with your provider before you stop or start a medication. To not base your decision on this Zoom presentation. This information with the general public, not individualized to you. Well, let me comment on that, because here's the important message, is that if you follow the changes I'm recommending, and you read one of my books and you eat that way with really a high degree of consistency, then if you don't stop medications, you're going to get hurt, because your blood pressure will drop too low and you'll hurt your kidney, you'll faint, your blood glucose. So if you don't reduce your medications and you eat so healthfully so you don't need them anymore, because you get overdosed with medications when you improve your diet, and the medications become more dangerous and can cause a problem if your doctor doesn't decrease your medication. So yes, get some assistance to your doctor to make sure that you don't start or stop a medication. Make sure you get ready to stop and reduce medications when you start eating this way, and you follow your blood pressure and the parameters more closely if you're on medication, particularly if you're diabetic or on high blood pressure medications, that your blood glucose doesn't get too low, or your blood sugar doesn't get too low. That's the same as blood glucose, or your blood pressure doesn't get too low, right? So this information is critically important, and it's not important to discuss this with your provider because they don't know anything about nutrition. They'll just dissuade you and say you need drugs and diet's not going to help you. Your provider doesn't really know much about nutrition. You have to instruct them. And you have to say to them, if you're on medications, I'm on medications, I'm going on this diet, and I need to be watched more closely, and I need to know whether I should cut back in half or discontinue completely based on the results I'm getting. So then there's communication you need to have, just to be more clear about that. Okay, next question. Can a plant-based diet lower LDL cholesterol? And I don't use the word plant-based too much, but I call it nutrient-dense, plant-rich, because I'm not clear of the scientific terminology of plant-based. Does that mean it's 60% of calories in plants? 80%? And is it unrefined plants, or are they using plant foods that's processed? I don't even know. But in any case, the point that I'm saying is that when you follow a nutritarian diet, which is a specific type of plant-based diet or plant-rich diet, nutrient-dense, and designed to eat the best foods for humans, the most longevity-promoting foods, then it dramatically lowers LDL cholesterol. I did a study on that, actually, with huge amounts of people, and it dropped, I think, LDL cholesterol a tremendous amount. And actually, Dr. Jenkins, David Jenkins of Toronto, did a study that showed it lowered LDL cholesterol 33% in his study, and my study showed like 50 points lowering. So both, very, very effective. What test do you recommend getting yearly? Well, I don't know. That depends on the person, because most of us don't need any testing. I could have tested my omega-3 index and tested my vitamin D a few years back and tested but once it's tested and I adjusted it, I'm not going to keep testing it year after year. The more healthy you are, the less testing you need, but you certainly should know your omega-3 index is probably the most important test to get, especially in a plant-based diet, because we know that you have increased risk of premature death with low omega-3 index below 5, and increased risk of dementia with a low omega-3 index. So we want to make sure we are keeping our omega-3 index above 5. So in a plant-based diet, that's the most important test to get, because most people know to take B12, but they don't know how much omega-3 they need to keep their omega-3 index in the right level. So what nuts and seeds are good to intake? They're good to take it depends on your body weight, how much to take in, right? So if you're like me, if I'm slim and athletic and doing a lot of sports and exercise, I can take in 3 to 4 ounces a day. But a person who's overweight, for a male, shouldn't consume more than 2 ounces, and for a female, shouldn't consume more than 1.5 ounces if they're significantly overweight. If they're not overweight, need the extra calories, they can eat much more than that. And the nuts and seeds, I'm saying eat the raw nuts and seeds, but half of that nut and seed intake, or at least a third, should come from hemp seeds and walnuts and flax seeds and chia seeds. And the other half could be pistachio, pecans, anything you want. Cashews. So I answered what oils are good. So if we're not absorbing the fat in the nuts and seeds, you're absorbing the fat, you're just not absorbing all the fat. Are we eating them for the healthy fat, or is that not counterproductive? You're not just eating them for the fat, you're eating them because they have a lot of other beneficial nutrients and selenium and fibers and phytochemicals and minerals. They're rich in a lot of proteins. They're giving you a lot of good things that we take in with the nuts and seeds. And we're getting some fat that we need in our diet, the amount of fat we need, in a form that doesn't lead to excessive overeating, that satisfies us more so we don't have to overeat to feel satisfied. So we're getting some fat from them. I'm not saying the fat goes through you. I'm saying maybe 10 or 15% of the fat doesn't get absorbed, which makes them not as fattening as oils, but they're not. But you're eating a handful of nuts and seeds gives you much less calories than oils do, because the oils are concentrating the fat and taking the fiber away, so it comes in more rapidly, and you're not getting the nutrients and other benefits at the same time. Is whole grain bread a good food? Not if it's made from whole grain pastry flour, of what whole wheat flour has been ground to like such a fine high glycemic carbohydrate. But I like those Food for Life Ezekiel breads that are made with sprouted grains. So they mix they put soy and sunflower seed and millet and whole wheats, and they mix a whole bunch of grains, they sprout them and they grind together and they make a loaf, which is a little more dense, not low in calories, but they're relatively low in sodium, and they're much healthier and higher in protein. And they're much healthier than eating these high glycemic breads. The manna breads are also made out of like just sprouted grains. So I'm an advocate of those sprouted grain breads as opposed to flours, Okay. Weight Watchers said that you need oils to carry the nutrients like a bus. I know you get like stupid advice from everyone. Isn't it crazy? You need oil. You have to have do you see jars of oil growing on a tree? There's it's completely utter ridiculous. There's no nutritional scientist in the world that will tell you that you need to take the walnut and squeeze the oil out to make it more favorable for your diet. Of course not. You just eat the walnut. You don't eat the oil from the walnut, because then you're throwing away all the good parts that prevent cancer. So stupidity is just so ingrained in nutrition, because people use any kind of nonsensical belief systems to support the way they want to eat, which is the present way they're dieting. And in any case, look at the people who succeed on Weight Watchers. They're just a bunch of unhealthy people. Okay, do nuts have to be raw and soaked, or is roasted okay? They should be raw. They don't have to be soaked, but roasted is not okay unless they're just toasted a little bit. You can bring out the flavor of an almond or a sesame seed by lightly toasting it, which isn't as far cooked as really roasting it. So we can mildly roast it or toast it, and it still won't totally turn brown. You'll just get a little hint of color. Like you can blanch an almond and put it in a toaster oven on the lowest setting, and just to make it dry out and enhance the flavor a little bit. Okay. On keto, low carb, healthy fats are encouraged. People are losing weight by increasing their healthy fats on these diets. Yes, you can also smoke cigarettes and snort cocaine to lose weight, and it works, snorting cocaine and smoking cigarettes to lose weight. But it's not a sustainable diet. It's not going to lead to longer lifespan. And we have now 4 separate studies on low carb diets and keto diets tracking people through their endpoint, the hard endpoint of death. And we find that the low carb diets and keto diets lead to excessive premature deaths, which is dying before the age of 70. So it's a formula for a shortened lifespan. It's a dangerous way to diet. It has nothing to do with whether you can lose weight. You can take drugs to lose weight. You can cut up your stomach to lose weight. Lots of ways you can lose weight that aren't healthy. You can use amphetamines to lose weight. You don't want to just lose weight. You want to lose weight, prevent cancer, do something that's sustainable so you can do it for the rest of your life, and do it so you can maintain the benefits, right? So keto diets are an example of higher fat, higher protein diets that are definitely dangerous. And they even showed increased risk of death in proportion to more animal protein, but also lower carbohydrates. Once you get below 30% of calories from carbohydrates, you see a big spike in premature death. So being in ketosis regularly is something that accelerates aging and shortens lifespan. Okay, we answered about dressings on the salad. How do you lose weight? By eating nuts, by not eating more than 2 ounces a day. It's 165 calories an ounce. An ounce and a half is about 200 calories. You can consume between 1,100 and 1,500 calories a day for people trying to lose weight. You can still eat nuts and lose weight. You're not going to snack on them. You're not going to be throwing them in cups in your mouth. You're going to be obviously using them sparingly, either on the salad or mixed in to make a dressing or a sauce, and you're not, overeating them. What about getting enough omega-3 fats versus omega-6? And the recommendation, take about 1.5 teaspoon of flaxseed oil for the omega-3. That's a really bad thing to do, because it's the lignins are part of the fibrous part of the flaxseed that prevent cancer. And by taking the flaxseed oil for omega-3, you'd be excluding the anti-cancer part of the seed. It's just all stupidity. not really stupidity, it's ignorance. People aren't having they're ignorant means you're not aware of it. And people are just not being taught the right information. Should be reading, writing, arithmetic, and nutritional science taught in grade school, because people believe anything they're told, and they don't really have enough knowledge to filter out the nonsense and all the chatter. Okay, am I suggesting that olive oil is as bad as cigarettes for your health? Well, if you don't smoke, then olive oil is worse than cigarettes for your health. If you smoke, then cigarettes are worse than olive oil for your health. But I'm suggesting that olive oil is fattening, and being fat is bad for your health. Yes. How about the Mediterranean diet, which has been studied and shown to lower cerebral vascular disease or cardiovascular disease? And the answer is, we don't buy a car by comparing it to a junkyard wreck. The leading cause of death in Mediterranean countries are still heart attacks and strokes and cancers. It's a diet that's a little better than the American diet. But you go over the Mediterranean countries. I was just over in Italy. Everybody's overweight. Everybody's in bad health. And it's not like the Mediterranean diet of years ago when they were working outdoors and, they did have more tomato sauce and more natural foods and more plants in their diet and less red meats. There were some benefits compared to the American diet. We're not talking about improving something a teeny bit. We're talking about designing a diet for excellence to maximize human longevity. And even the blue zones around the world only live about 8 years longer than the average American does. They don't live, what I'm saying, 20 years longer. I'm saying the average American dies around 77 to 79 today, and we should be able to live 97. That's 20 years more, not 8 years like a blue zone. That a nutritarian, this way of eating gives us a unique opportunity to really have incredible play span, health span, and keep our mental and physical faculties into our later years. Okay. Let's see, more questions. We have a few more minutes. Water saute, yes, you can water saute. Does eating meat cause cancer? Yes, the World Health Organization considers meat, red meat, a class 1 carcinogen, which increases risk of colon cancer. Our doctor told us to take 2,000 vitamin D a day because it's low for me and my 13-year-old. What she's pushing on vitamin D, I agree that 2,000 IUs is a reasonable amount to take, not 5,000 or more. You don't need to push your levels up high. You just need to enter the normal range. And if you're already taking 2,000 and your level's 25 or above, I would not increase it. So yeah, don't overkill or take too much. Just take enough to be in the normal range. And 2,000 a day should be plenty. Can we get a presentation with slides with this information? Yes, you can go to drfuhrman.com and you can look at some of the events which are recorded, and you can get them with you can get all the slides. But don't forget, a lot of my events and my lectures are an hour and a half. They're a series of like 3 hours of presentations with slides. But this is just with an overview, which I just spent 25 minutes to give you some of the highlights. That's why I didn't want to slow it down with slides. So I can just give you like a introduction that you can see, look more, you can learn more. And I'm strongly recommending you read the book Eat for Life, because there's more than 2,000 medical and scientific references in there. It's the most heavily referenced and carefully referenced and properly referenced book for lay people and for health professionals to understand the most critical factors in nutrition today. Okay, I weigh 5'2" and weigh 110. Do I need the same nutrients as a 150 or 200-pound person? Well, if you're smaller, then you eat less calories and you get a proportion of less nutrients. If you're bigger, you eat more calories and you get a proportion of more nutrients. But so the individual nutrients, B12, D, omega-3, iodine, the RDI for iodine is 150. That's 1/10 of a teaspoon of, my supplement, for example, has 150 micrograms of iodine, but a person using a little bit of kelp wouldn't even need that. They can get it from seaweed, but most of us don't have seaweed regularly, so we put it in the supplement. All right. What about oil you put in a pan? Well, I wouldn't put oil and cook in a pan. I'm not recommending you do that. I'm curious about recommendations for supplementing B12, D3, omega-3, and iodine. Well, I mean, we can't go over everything, but I think most people know that plant-based diets are low in B12. D3 is the sunshine vitamin. Not all people on plant-based diets need it, and most people on animal product diets still need it too, if they're not outdoors a lot and not outdoors enough. So we want the levels at least above 25 on the 25 hydroxy vitamin D test. You may not have to supplement D3, but most of us because we live indoors and avoid the sun for skin cancer and wrinkling of our skin. So we take the vitamin D. And omega-3, of course, we're talking about EPA and DHA, which people call fish oil. There are vegan forms of DHA, and I have one that I have on my website too. But I'm suggesting that the Achilles heel of a plant-based diet are the many thousands of people that have made themselves omega-3 deficient, which could then cause more inflammation, more susceptibility to Parkinson's and dementia in later life. And I've produced a lot of studies on that and written a lot about it in my books, and talked about, and I have a unique experience, probably as the only practicing clinician for the last 35 years, taking care of a population of elderly vegans and healthy eating vegans who develop serious neurologic problems due to omega-3 deficiencies in later life. What about salmon? Other than mercury, most health magazine recommends eating salmon for omega-3. Yes, you can eat a certain amount of fish to get omega-3 instead of taking a vegan oil, but then you're not on a vegan diet, right? Then you're just eating animal products. And a lot of us want to not eat animal products and take all the fish out of the sea. And also, there's contaminants in animal products, and we can get in too much protein, which can accelerate aging. So if you do use salmon as your source of omega-3, then I'm suggesting you don't eat that much of it, occasionally, or, don't eat more than like one serving of fish per week, and get your omega-3 and protein from plant foods if you want to maximize your chances for slowing aging and maximizing lifespan.
Next month, we're having a presenter about getting people to start a backyard garden. And I recently saw one of your podcasts, and you talked about a little bit of different benefits that people would think of starting a garden. Do you mind just commenting on that just for a minute or two?
Yes, go to my website and click on the podcast and read listen to my most recent podcast with my daughter, Jenna, on gardening. I think you'll find it very interesting. And I think that there's a tremendous relationship between people that garden and living longer lifespans. It's the act of working on gardening and making food yourself and eating some of the food that you grow yourself. Even if you could have a grow box in your house or make sprouts in your apartment, it's still good to do that. If you don't have a house where you can put in a garden, then at least grow sprouts and microgreens indoors, or have a little Mayway kumquat tree on the side of in your living room too. So I'm a huge advocate of working with the soil, and I love to make compost and fertilize my trees. And it's such a hobby of mine that I love to do. I get such a pleasure of saying, look at these apricots. So you got to taste this cherimoya, or this, you got to taste the peach from the tree or the persimmon I grew. It's like, it's so much fun. Or growing the bok choy, and bok choy is such a great food and so easy to grow, and asparagus beds and all the things we grow, long cucumbers and heirloom tomatoes and really super sweet peppers, and the food tastes great. And the lettuce that's so tender, it kind of like melts in your mouth. Gardening is fun, and it makes you live longer. So please, it's a good idea to listen to that podcast. I think it could motivate a lot of you. And some of my podcasts you can listen to on your, when you're driving a car or something, the audio versions, which can be motivating to you too.